Welcome to this short lesson on Protest and Progress, 1960 to 62, specifically the Freedom Riders. The aims of this lesson are 1. To know about a key example of a civil rights protest, to explain why peaceful protests succeeded, and to evaluate the extent of change these protests brought about. This is the second in a series of 3 short lessons. Your starter or do now task. Long distance coach travel meant that a passenger could catch a bus from the northern USA to visit the south. Why would segregation be a difficult issue for long distance coaches? Give that issue some thought and pause the video now if you want to write down an answer. Well, it's worth remembering that many of the states in the north did not have segregation rules. Therefore, you could board a bus in a northern state that was completely desegregated and yet have to endure segregation and segregationist rules by the time you got to the south. Alternatively, the buses could segregate from their point of departure in the north, and therefore they wouldn't need to change the segregation rules when they got to the south. So this is a tricky issue. And anyway, the 1955 to 56 Montgomery bus boycott was supposed to have desegregated public transport anyway, or at the very least it had set that precedent in Montgomery. So let's find out what the Freedom Riders were all about. The Freedom Riders took place in 1961. As I've just mentioned, in 1956, the Supreme Court desegregated state buses. This was the Browder versus Gale case that was a result of the Montgomery bus boycott. But station facilities were not desegregated until 1960. In 1961, CORE, this is the Congress of Racial Equality, decided to test to see if this had taken place. On May the 4th of 1961, 7 black and 6 white CORE Freedom Riders left Washington, D.C. on 2 separate buses. In Georgia, the state governor urged calm. Only 2 Freedom Riders were arrested. Problems began as they reached Alabama and then Mississippi, where the press and governor spoke against them. Even some northern media claimed that they were just looking for trouble, and the White Citizens Councils and KKK, remember these were racist terrorist organisations, swore to stop them. Your tasks then. Firstly, summarise the event under the headings what, when, where, who and why. Secondly, how effective might this form of protest be? And thirdly, as an extension, consider the tactics used by the KKK and White Citizens Council. What might they try to do to stop the Freedom Riders? Pause the video now while you complete those tasks. Okay, so what was this? This was a protest that was testing desegregation on interstate bus transport. When did it happen? Well, the Freedom Rides started on the 4th of May 1961, although they did continue afterwards. Where did it take place? Well, they left Washington, D.C. before travelling through Georgia, Alabama and Mississippi. Who were they? Well, they're 6 white and 7 black CORE, in other words, Congress of Racial Equality protesters. And why were they doing it? Because they were testing to see whether desegregation on the buses had really taken place. So why might this form of protest be effective? Again, this is an example of non-violent direct action protest. This was both visible and it is a tactic that had previously worked. Remember the sit-in protest. This is a bit like the sit-in movement but on buses. Thirdly then, the tactics of the KKK and the WCC meant that they would usually use violence to stop these protesters. In fact, nothing was off limits. Members of the WCC and KKK were well known for having murdered black protesters in the South. And so again, the Freedom Riders are taking a significant risk by doing this. Anniston, 14th of May 1961. You can see some of the harm that might be done to the Freedom Riders in these images. I've also attached 2 introductory videos to the description to this video, and I urge you to watch those because they'll give you an even better understanding. One covers the Freedom Riders in a more general sense, whereas the other looks at the events at Anniston from the point of view of a white eyewitness who was a little girl at the time. She helped some of the protesters, despite the fact that her dad was one of the people who was likely a racist who was taking part in the violence. So reaction to the Freedom Riders came to a head on the 14th of May 1961. As one bus reached Anniston, Alabama, it was stopped by around 100 KKK members. The tyres were burst and a firebomb was thrown through the window. As the fire took hold, a white policeman on board the bus had to force it open and those on board escaped, just before the fuel tank exploded. Let's not have any misunderstandings about this. Even though no one was killed, the KKK were intending to hurt people and possibly even kill them during this event. A second bus arrived, unaware of what had happened to the first one. Freedom Riders were dragged off and beaten. The bus set off for Birmingham, Alabama, where the same thing happened. Local police chief Bull Connor ordered that the police should not stop the KKK. Indeed, it's more likely that the police would have been joining in. We're going to revisit Bull Connor. He was the police chief in Birmingham, Alabama, and is even more closely linked to an event called Campaign C in Birmingham, but that's something for the next lesson. Both groups eventually escaped to Birmingham Airport with the help of the ACMHR, that's the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. So describe the events that took place at Anniston. Then secondly, the event was widely filmed and photographed. You'll appreciate this if you've seen the videos that I've attached. A. How would this filming and photographing affect the view of the Northern media? Remember, the Northern media had initially accused these people of having been troublemakers. Secondly, why would this put pressure on the government? Pause the video now while you complete those tasks. So hopefully we've been able to describe the events in Anniston in some detail. How would the videos and the photographs of the event affect the Northern media? Well, one of the things to understand is the Northern media had been quite critical. For some of them, this would be evidence that the Freedom Riders were indeed troublemakers. For others, though, it likely gained them some sympathy. They may have seen the Freedom Riders initially as being troublemakers, but they would have recognised, very likely, that they did not in any way deserve the terrible racist abuse and very shocking violence that they had to suffer. So why would this put pressure on the government? Well, yet again, the government were kind of dragging their heels over the segregation issue. And so this is another very visible demonstration of the violence that black people had to suffer in the South and how actually things weren't getting that much better. So the government should do more and act more dramatically in order to alter things. So what did the government do? Well, first of all, think why there might be a soldier on the bus. Have a look at the picture that's just at the bottom there. Well, that will be a federal soldier. And I think it's worth remembering what happened at Little Rock in 1957. Federal soldiers were sent into Little Rock High School to ensure that those black children were able to go to that school, whereas previously the National Guard had barred them entry. This is a similar tactic again. SNCC, this is the Student Non-Violent Coordinating Committee, were determined not to back down in the face of WCC and Ku Klux Klan violence. On May the 17th, 10 riders travelled from Nashville, Tennessee to Birmingham. No driver would take them any further than that. On May the 20th, 1961, the police escorted the bus as far as Montgomery, where 1,000 KKK and WCC members attacked them and started attacking black people on the street. One boy was even set alight. The riders were arrested for starting a riot. Again, another clear example of law enforcement siding with the racists, not with the protesters. On May the 24th, the police escorted a bus from Montgomery to Jackson, Mississippi. On arrival, the riders were arrested. However, by the end of August, and after 60 freedom rides, 300 riders were in Jackson jail, many of them being tortured. But by November the 1st, the federal government insisted that federal officers would enforce desegregation, and so the freedom rides ended. As a part of this, soldiers were put on the buses to ensure that the KKK and the police couldn't be brutal towards the freedom riders themselves. And also by ensuring that the freedom rides had ensured their main goal, the government was actually demonstrating that they supported desegregation on the buses and were prepared to use federal authority to make sure it happened. So your tasks. You're going to create a timeline of the main events and the freedom rides from May to November 1961. An A4 piece of paper should be plenty big enough for this if you turn it landscape, so decide on a sensible scale of a few centimetres per month. Violence brought bad publicity to the White Citizens Council and the KKK. Why do you think they continue to behave in this way? Okay, pause the video now while you complete those tasks. So hopefully you've been able to formulate your timeline, but what about that second issue? Well, the fact is that the WCC and KKK weren't really interested in having bad publicity. These were racist terrorist organisations anyway, and the KKK in particular had a secret membership in the event, so most people wouldn't have known the individuals who were taking part. So they continued to behave in this way because they were violent racists, and that was not going to change overnight. And they felt that their violent tactics were necessary to preserve their point of view, as horrible as that is to us. So why did the Freedom Riders of 1961 succeed? If you completed the lesson on the Montgomery bus boycott, you'll have seen an example that's similar to this before. Add examples to your own copy of the flowchart under Commitment, Publicity and Organisation, and be as specific as possible. You'll want to sketch out this diagram first. Secondly, in what ways were the tactics similar to the Montgomery bus boycott? So you could review the flowchart that you could produce from that, or you could have a look back at my lesson on that and have a go at it anyway. Thirdly, in what ways were the Freedom Riders' tactics different to the Montgomery bus boycott? And as an extension, explain why they might have been different. So pause the video here if you want to complete that task. So similar tactics from the Montgomery bus boycotts is this is still about desegregating buses, and so it's actually following a similar issue. What they're demanding here is that desegregation happened. But the crucial difference is that these tended to be mixed groups of both white and black protesters. This meant that they were directly challenging segregation. That's not something that the boycotters did. They instead refused to ride the buses. The point with the Freedom Riders is that they were, in fact, riding the buses. Now we've done that summary, we'll finish the lesson there. It has only been a short mini lesson anyway, so I hope it's been useful to you. If it has been useful, then please like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. The third video in this short series of mini lessons is going to be on the James Meredith case, so tune into that one next. Thanks very much, and goodbye.